Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 30. Today, our episode is with Tyler Stacy of Commune Regional Wines. Tyler runs Commune with his wife Emily, and together they're making wines from places that they love. These are well-made, bright, and textured wines from California that go great with food and family. We had our conversation at the Harmeyer/Harbor Winery in West Sacramento, where Commune is based. I hope you enjoy. Here we go.
It certainly provided the addition of fruit, which I was hoping for,
Yeah.
but still I'm very happy with the result. It's really delicious and smells and tastes distinctly of feijoa.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever had like a pineapple guava,
Yeah.
which is like
My grandpa used to have one of those trees. I would
it's so great.
eat them all the time. When I'd always pick like shopping bag full of them, to
God,
take
dude.
home.
It's probably my favorite fruit, and
it?
I first discovered them in New Zealand while I was there working harvest in Central Hawke's Bay, and it was like I didn't even know a fruit could taste like that.
Yeah.
And then we were tasting a bottle just like a couple weeks ago, I think, with Adam Saki, and he was like, "You know what it smells like?" He's like, "It smells like feijoa." I was like, "Whoa!" I was like, "Dude, it does." It smells and tastes exactly like feijoa.
I want to know how you got started in wine. What was your interest like, and what kind of led you down the path?
So I come mostly from restaurants. I started working. I've worked almost exclusively in restaurants
Okay.
until not working in restaurants.
In what capacity?
All of them.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got a job thanks to my uncle who knew a finance guy at a Mexican restaurant in Fresno, California. And I was the busboy there.
Okay.
And then I got bumped to server.
Okay.
And then one day there was a couple who had come in who were locals and regulars, and they owned a restaurant in town, a well-regarded one called Parma Ristorante. And they approached me at the end of their meal. The fun detail is that Elena, who owns the restaurant, is a massive fan of guacamole.
Okay.
And so she would come in and just like hoover a bowl of guacamole. And they were like, "Hey, we saw you working. Like, if you are interested in like another job, like you should come talk to us."
Okay.
And I was, I think, 18 at the time, 17 or 18 at the
okay.
time. So
Yeah.
I was like, no one's ever done that before. So, all right, I'll go talk to you guys. And, several years later, they were, Joe and Elena were a second family to me. And I would spend most of my Thanksgivings and Christmas while living in Fresno with them. And, obviously with my own family as well. But I was more excited because it was usually, a 45-pound turkey and every classic Italian holiday dish.
Okay.
30 people, like it just was like such a party. And so they just became really, really influential in my life at that time. And it was, for me, was, kind of as a kid with no real path or anything to do, they kind of showed me something I didn't know existed before.
Okay.
And really what that was, in hindsight now I understand, was like the unbelievable passion and purpose that Italian culture abides by. And so, it was also pretty cool that like I could, finish my shift with like a glass of Chianti.
Yeah.
She always told me never to tell anybody about that, but that definitely happened. And as a young kid, that was the coolest thing that had ever happened to me. So I thought that was pretty amazing. And there just was something about like the never ending option to learn something
Okay.
that was like unbelievably captivating to me. All my formative years were all focused exclusively on music. And it's a similar topic where it doesn't really matter how good you get or how skilled you are at a given instrument or whatever. You're never going to like, you don't like conquer it or master it. Like there's always something, and you have to continue to evolve your skill set. And so there was something about like, Italy was a hell of a place to start, because even today I'm more than a dozen years into my career and I still learn about Italian varieties I've never even heard of.
Right. There's a lot
regularly,
of them. Yeah.
regularly. So, it was a hell of a place to start. And that just kind of, I think, set something in motion where I really, really enjoyed not only just the learning of it, but also the conversation that you get to have and being able to be tableside and have a communicative engagement with people who are like, here's kind of what we're looking for. What do you think? And I don't know who the hell thought it was a good idea to ask me at 19 years old if they should have Brunello or Barolo, but I had an answer for them, And so there was something about that just like really captivated me. And, years and years later down the road, I think I was maybe finally 21 or 22 and I heard the word sommelier for the first time. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that could be like a job. That was not on my radar. So I kind of learned a little bit more about that. And then, I explored it and I took over my first, wine program at 22,
Okay.
which certainly no one should have let me do, but I did it. I've always been a bit of a strong believer in fake it till you make it. So
yeah. You just jump in on it.
I was definitely faking it at the time. But it was exciting and it felt good. And it was really cool to be, it was weird. You could just be like, yeah, I make the decisions now. And then everyone will show up and let you taste any wine you want, And so, at 22 years old, you're like, yeah, I'll taste anytime, all the time, whenever you want. And so it was just a really great experience to kind of have that opportunity to learn. And then I went through the quartermaster sommelier for, certification. I don't even remember what year that was, and kind of rode that train for a number of years. And that certainly that very quickly became zero interest to me.
Okay.
For a whole number of reasons. I kind of, the universe was, I think, trying to teach me a long lesson, which was you don't need to be working in restaurants. And so I, tried and I put my heart and soul into many different projects, and they all met their demise at one point or another. And it just did not seem like a path that was stable enough for what I wanted in life. And so, in and out, and I think it was 2013 after a really difficult closure that was, the highest level I had worked at. We were operating, at a very high Michelin level standard. And this was before the Michelin Guide was involved in Sacramento at all. And we were really, really pressing them to open up reviews in the city at the time. And they didn't have interest. They didn't think there was enough going on. And so, just the restaurant didn't have the ability to survive, those, Sacramento's ever enduring difficult years of, excitement and then, disappointment, which has gone on so many times, it seems like. But
okay, does it have a little bit of that kind of a wave?
It seems like
wave kind of
I think anyone who's
fluctuations?
been here for a time, there's kind of always been like a lot of talk or a lot of hype about, it's going to be this next city. And then all the people that are like from here and they're like, no one cares. Like, no, it's not. We're not trying to do that. We just live here and we're just doing what we're doing. Stop comparing us to a bunch of other cities. That's not really the point. But there's always been kind of this hype and like the food scene, this and that. And, I think now it's finally coming around full circle where people are understanding like it's more about what like the community that exists here and the ability to have access to the greatest produce in the world. It's just there's not very many places like here in that regard. So I think that like, it just was, there's always kind of been those cycles. And so we were operating at like a really high level and, today's standard, it was unbelievably affordable compared to what you pay now. But, it was expensive and it was tasting menu and like no one was really, that was a jump. That was a special occasion, I think, for people, where now it seems a little bit more commonplace. And so, that kind of closed on a whim, and that was like a phone call one night.
Oh,
that was like,
not even.
I'm giving you a heads up because I just found out when you show up tomorrow, there will not be service, So, and that was like putting every ounce, that was like 14-hour days every day, like grueling, Also, the cellar was upstairs, so there's that physical component of having to truck cases up and down constantly, and it just was a lot. And so that was I think maybe that was 2012, the end of 2012, and so that just was kind of a lot emotionally to let go of that. And I had a friend of mine, Chris Pittenger, who, he had started his own project. He had been a winemaker for, several years, but he was a sommelier previously and moved into the realm of winemaking. And so I was like, I just connected with him. I was like, how'd you do that? What did you do? And he's like, the first thing you have to do is take a pay cut. And I was like, I'm already broke, so it's fine with me. And so we talked a lot, and he was really helpful. And so I went and worked. I went and did a harvest in Central Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, which was about as far away as I could possibly manage. But it was more timing. I was like, it's going to be spring, and they're going to harvest, and that'll just be in 2 months' time or whatever. So it kind of made sense. And so I went and did that. And then came back, and then subsequently worked harvest with Chris that following year. And so I kind of just like really jumped and dove into that, and it was kind of the right time and place to be able to take that sort of risk where I didn't need a bunch of cash, and I could be a bit of a, vagrant, if you will, and sleep in a trailer and in New Zealand, and it just was it was possible. So I did that and really loved it. There's a lot about harvest that mimics, working on the floor in a restaurant, where it can be really fast paced, but it's really fun. It's actually really important how articulate you are. And like, there's a lot of similarities that really tracked for me. And it was a great opportunity to see, like, really live how you get what's in the bottle. And that was a pretty amazing experience. And so I did that for a handful of consecutive harvests. And then I decided that I needed to have a stable income. So I got a job. I think it was, I don't remember, but I think working in another restaurant or managing a place or something. And again, another failing business meeting its ultimate demise. And I was apparently hired to try and save it, which was not a good idea. And I did that for a number of years and just, wanted to pull my hair out. The classic overworked, underpaid general managers, never a good gig. So I had met a guy on a trip to Santa Barbara wine country several years prior, Jared Hebert, and he started a company that was like kind of a newer wholesale company, and they had a lot of really cool kind of new California producers down in that neck of the woods, like Graham Tatomer and the Ludi wines that Eric Railsback was doing, and it was really kind of exciting. And he was also selling Ryan Sturm stuff, and so it was like, I was like, these are all extremely exciting new producers in California. And so kind of through a random chance, I reconnected with him and was like, what's up with what you're doing right now? I was buying some wine from him at the time, and I was like, do you want like a rep? And he was like, sure. We don't have anybody up there. Like, you'd have to just do it and, build it yourself. You're not walking into any money. And I was like, whatever, that's fine. Anything other than what I'm doing right now. And that was more or less that. And so I got into wholesale, which I think was, in hindsight, probably the best thing that could have happened for me, because it was the piece that I didn't really have exposure to.
Okay. Yeah.
In the marketplace of wine, there's, people who grow it, there's people who make it, there's people who sell it, and there's people who drink it, And so that was kind of the layer that I hadn't really experienced yet. And, 7 years later now, I manage Northern California for Grand Cru Selections. They've did a merger recently. And I feel like it's the one thing I know better than anything is how to sell wine.
Okay.
And less just the selling of wine, but more the opportunity to build a network of people that you can engage with in this world. And I remember thinking about wanting to start making wine and realizing that I've heard like so many people that's like, or like some small mom and pop thing. Yeah. And it's like the selling of the wine, they don't know how to do it. They can't do it.
Yeah.
They've got 3 or 4 vintages in the warehouse, and it just, and so after several years working in wholesale, I was like, I think I feel cool that I can sell the wines. I think I feel confident about that. So now I just need to figure out how to do it.
Uh-huh.
And so that was the next challenge.
Yeah. So your first vintage was 2020. Is that right? Of Commune?
It was, our first crush was 2020. We released 2 wines under another brand, which again is my typical do it first and figure it out later methodology. Okay. And so we just started doing, and 2020 was a hell of a vintage to start making wine. It was obviously full-blown COVID. All the restaurants were closed. I had literally nothing to do. There wasn't much that we could do. Everyone had to stay home. And obviously like we were working much closer with retailers because everyone was at home drinking and rather than being in restaurants. And so just the day to day was completely different, and we had a lot of free time. And so I talked to my wife, Emily, and I was like, this is something I've wanted to start doing almost 10 years ago, like what better time than now? And she was like, do it. So I was like, okay. She was like, what do you want to make? I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. And so I just set some really loose parameters on what I needed to do it, which really was just whatever fruit, whatever variety I can seem to get that seems interesting enough.
Yeah.
And if it's from a place that I want to express, then I'll just do it. And if it's cheap, that was the other one. And so we started in Solano County in Green Valley, which is my hometown. I was born and raised in Fairfield and spent all my adolescence there, and caused all sorts of mischief on those back roads and running in and around those vineyards, as a kid. And I that was completely outside of my realm of awareness as a kid. I wasn't connected to wine. We didn't have, my first wine was a box of Franzia blush, the day before my first communion. That was the only thing I'd ever had before. So it wasn't really anything that was in my purview. And so being able to be like, oh, wow, like full circle, those vines are still there. They were there when I was a kid on this road. And now I can ferment that fruit and make a wine out of it. It was like a really, really wonderful moment to explore. And so we started there and then figured out everything after that.
What was it that initially kind of drew you back to Solano?
I mean, it wasn't really on purpose, to be honest. I didn't have any real familiarity with the wines that were being made there. I mean, I knew Suisun Valley was coined the Petite Syrah capital of the world, or whatever they call it, and I've never really been a fan of Petite Syrah. It's always typically produced like as a really big wine, and that's not really my taste. So I didn't really have much familiarity. I'd maybe had like, a couple bottles that, Chris Brockway had produced from that area. Pax has made some things there as well. So I didn't really know. And it just was like, what is available? And so I just was like searching classified ads, on Wine Business and seeing what popped up. And I saw an ad for, you know, French Colombard and Valdegui, and they had some of those, you know, more obscure things. And I just, you know, started exploring a little bit, and it kind of led me down that path. And then on a whim, through a friend of mine, Lisa Howard, who owns Tilliness, she like hit me up on Instagram about a random thing, and she was like, "Oh, is this the Carignan that you're trying to get this year?" And I was like, "No, but what is that?" Like, it was big, gnarly, you know, head train, and I was like, "What is that?" And she's like, "I'll find out." Just like, it's called Parenti Vineyard, and I was like, "Okay, cool. Like, I want to get some of that for sure." So she helped get me in touch, and we made that and French Colombard from the neighboring vineyard in 2020. And so it was not intentional, but it kind of started a wheel turning, you know, creatively in my brain. It was like, maybe there's actually something interesting about this place. And then I started thinking more about it, and I was like, actually, like, I don't even care if it's that interesting. Like, I want to be able to express this place that has been so important to me in my life, you know? And so there's a lot of, you know, full circle healing type things of, you know, being back in your hometown, you know, and having for so many years felt like, my stupid hometown, like that place is so stupid, you know, there's nothing there, and like, blah. And then being like, well, maybe there are some redeeming qualities, you know, and like having to go back there all the time, you know, to like check on vineyards and, you know, sample and be in the vines is like, it's a really cool experience. And now I'm dead set on continuing, you know, and we, over the past few years, we've kind of, you know, grown what we want to do there. And I think with this harvest, I think we kind of have a good idea of like what I think best represents not only the history, but the future of Solano County. And it feels really cool to be able to participate in that.
Yeah, I feel like it's still a little unexplored for the types of wines that you're making.
I would agree. I think it's
but it's an intriguing area, and
Green Valley in particular. And I think because it's so small, you know, it's 4 miles long and 1 mile wide. It's a very, very small area, and it's pretty unexplored. There's only a handful of wineries, and there's only so much vineyard land, and most people who are getting that fruit are, as far as I know, they're putting it into other things. And so you can't just go be like, cool, what does Green Valley Carignan taste like? That's not like an example you can just go pull off the shelf everywhere. You know, it's such a small niche area. And so, you know, it's not the entirety of Solano County. So it, to me, is like a great place to start. And, you know, getting people to understand, it's like, no, literally on the other side of the, like, if you were strong enough, you could hit Coombsville with a rock, you know, standing in Green Valley. It's that close. So it's, you know, it's an interesting place. And there's a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of, there's a lot of compared to how large the place is, but there's a lot of old vines there that are, you know, head trained and they're dry farmed, and they're, you know, a lot of them are kind of this typical, you know, mixed blacks type situation with Carignan and Valdegui and Petit Syrah. And, you know, producers were using this typical set, you know, for like the Hardy Burgundy era of wines.
Yeah.
And that to me is like such a special piece of history. And a lot of those vines are still there. And why not, you know, try to capture what's happening now, and, you know, being able to utilize information we have now, and, you know, be able to express a place in a new way. And so it's a really cool kind of link of history. And that's a big part of, it's a large component of how we try to think about the wines that we want to make, because really our focus is about trying to objectively identify what best represents a region. You know, this is something that is well understood throughout European wine growing countries. it's much easier if you've had hundreds and hundreds of years to identify a grape variety and then legally mandate that just one grape variety is all we're going to grow, or two or three or whatever, It's much easier to have that narrow focus. It's still the Wild West out here, and you can do anything, as we were discussing. You can have a Sirtico in Lodi, and you can have Vermentino in El Dorado. You can do anything. There's not really that many rules in that regard. So I think from my perspective, having come up through the world of sommeliers, that type of awareness about how do you understand a place, that is the thing that I want to capture. And when we first started, crushing on our own a couple of years ago, I realized very, very quickly that I didn't have a damn clue what any of these places tasted like.
Okay.
And so I was like, wow, that I have a problem with that. I could do that blindly for so many regions and so many varieties all throughout Europe and many other places in the world. But here I couldn't tell you like what a wine from Amador County versus El Dorado County or versus Solano County or Monterey, like that's a much more obscure question, and then you factor in like, well, what's the variety? And, maybe this variety you could pick out, but if it's a different grape, you wouldn't understand that place enough to be able to acknowledge, where it came from without, if you were understanding it blind. So it kind of was a challenge, a personal challenge. And so that's kind of where the idea and the concept of commune regional wines came from, was attempting to participate in the exploratory nature of defining what regions taste like, and then setting some parameters like, we're not going to use new wood. We're only going to use native yeasts. We're not going to filter, like, so those things where, there's obviously 1,000 conversations about terroir and expression and what counts for that and how you influence it, but trying to be as removed as we can, and like, we don't want to have to change chemistry. We don't want to have to do those things. And so we have to try to think like, okay, well, French Colombard, for example, it grows in a warm climate, but the acid in French Colombard is like a strike of lightning. No matter what you do to it, you could hang it as long as you want. It's probably still 3.1 pH, and it's like, it's gonna be really acidic. And so kind of leaning into those things where like, no one's like, oh my God, French Colombard, it's like such an amazing new hot white variety. It's like, well, it's not really, but
it's been around for a while.
It's been around a while. It was really popular, and that's the reason why it was so popular. It was always, planted next to Chenin Blanc or Chardonnay, because that would be like the addition of acidity that you needed. And generally, it crops really high. It's a pretty bland flavor, so you can throw it into a bunch of stuff and not know that it's there. And this is not really that case. I think this particular vineyard has a unique personality, and that was the perfect example of like, this is not like a variety that I'm like, this is so great and everyone needs to know about it, but like, this place expresses white wines. And to me, this is indicative of what Sacramento County white wine can and should taste like.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is we get all the mountains are just adjacent to us, and all those rocks have, fallen down and washed out. And that's what a lot of the soil is, when you get a little bit further east, at least. So yeah, it's just kind of continuing that conversation of like trying to learn, trying to make some loose assumptions, gather some guidelines, and get a feeling, of a place, and then trying to cerebrally process like, what does this place make me feel like? And then translate that into, when you drink a wine, how do you feel that same way?
Yeah.
How do you identify the exact set of variables, be it a variety and sugar content and whole clusters or not, all these different decisions that you have to make. How can you best make those decisions so that when you open that bottle of wine, you feel that place? and that's a really hard thing to have to figure out. But it's been an amazing learning journey thus far, and you have to take some risks and you have to make some mistakes along the way, which is the difficult part because you still have to pay for all those mistakes. But it's a part of the challenge, which is exciting.
How do you find yourself tweaking something like the French Colombard as you make it over a couple vintages? A grape that's not bottled all that often on its own and from an area that it's not bottled from.
Certainly. I think that I'm always processing, always.
Okay.
And fortunately and unfortunately, I am like the worst critic of myself. So I'm always analyzing, and it's a weird dichotomy to like complete the wines, bottle the wines, put the wines into the market, show them to people, and have my own feelings about them because I'm very analytical and I know what I want out of them, and then to feel like they're not where I want them, but then people still like the wines a lot. And so It's like a weird dichotomy of being like, one thing, that I won't ever forget that a good friend, Adam Sake, told me is, I was asking him a question about something, and I maybe made some offhanded remark like, well, like whatever, I don't think it matters that much. And he's like, it does, because these are not your wines anymore. These are going to be other people's wines. They're going to buy that wine and it's going to be in their fridge or on their table. It's going to belong to them. So now, more or less, now make your decisions about what you want to do, because it does matter, because, a winemaker is essentially more of a steward than anything. This isn't, some personal individual, oftentimes it is, the mark of someone's style or, their own interpretation of a place. And we're intentionally trying to like not necessarily do so much of our own interpretation and let the places speak. So, that was a big light bulb of like, yeah, we have to think about who's enjoying these wines. How can we help them understand a place, And so the French Colombard, for example, is, in 21, we made that for the first time, and I really enjoyed the result. And in 22, I felt like I really liked it, but I kind of wanted a little bit more fruit quality. I wanted just a little extra layer of something.
Okay.
And so in 22, we took a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc from the top block and we fermented them separately. And, I thought these could work really well together, and we included about 25% in the 22. And I originally, when we bottled the wines, I didn't really, I was like, I don't know, it's not really what I wanted it to be.
Okay.
And now over time, it's like, I actually really like it. It's a really delicious wine, and that's not what I thought was going to happen. And so, now we just tasted the 23 at a barrel, and I don't think that was, the 22 was like what I want it to be. So we'll not do that again. And then we'll probably just leave it on its own. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
It just is one of those things of like, you have to try things. And, the difficult part in winemaking is it takes a long time to understand if that was a good decision or not a good decision.
Of course.
It takes, sometimes a year or many to find out if that was a good choice or not. And so it's a long road to get those answers. But, I think it takes, thoughtfulness and a lot of attention to detail. And you have to be willing to not be right and then make a change.
Yeah. What is it that draws you to a certain vineyard that when you see it or taste other wines from it that makes you want to work with it, or that you think you can I guess, help kind of tell the story of that place.
Yeah, see, now we're getting into the real good stuff. I get really, I get a little like weird woo woo energetic
Okay.
in this
That's okay.
particular segment, which to me is really important. It's not everyone's flavor. It's not everyone thinks, but to me, I've been for a very long time trying to identify what is this extra thing that appears to exist. For example, in this particular winery, if Craig Harmeyer and I made wine from the same vineyard, and even if we did it exactly the same, those wines are ultimately going to end up tasting different. There's something about the tiny microscopic detail of maybe the way I pumped it over versus the way he punched it down, or even if the protocol is the same, I don't know. I'm still trying to identify it, but there is some extra layer that's not tangible that appears to show itself in the end product.
Yeah.
And so for me, trying to find a place that I feel like I want to express first comes from that place of feeling something. And it's less, ultimately we get to the vineyard portion, but I try to start like from a broad scope of like, I've been wanting to make something in El Dorado County. That was kind of where that was my first harvest, was in El Dorado County. And so like, it's always been there, but I wasn't sure like, what's the thing that would make sense? What is the variety or the collection of varieties that I feel like is going to express this place the way that I think it should, like the way that I feel about it. And, having seen virtually every single variety that's grown in that place and fermented them and tasted that, I'm quite familiar with it. And I don't always I don't really like a lot of the wines. And so that was something that kind of just the timing and the connection point, I hate to go that direction, but the universe kind of had to like get us there. And so, for this year, we tasted the 23 Vermentino out of barrel. And, that kind of came on a connection with Chuck Mansfield several years ago, and kind of having been in conversation a little bit here and there, but nothing, what was available and the timing, it just wasn't, it didn't really come together. And so I've learned to be much more open-handed in that regard of how you kind of, try to source things or get it into a new vineyard. Like timing is everything,
Sure.
and it's much more about the people that you're working with rather than like a given place or a vineyard or whatever. Like, if the people that manage that place or farm that vineyard like suck, like why? Because that energy is going into your transaction, which is going to find its way into the wine one way or another. Like I'm fully convinced of that. And it might be a fine product, but like you're always gonna feel something about it. At least me, I don't really disconnect in that way energetically. So the way that those experiences feel to me is like how I'll always feel about that given wine or something.
Yeah.
So it's like letting kind of life take you on that journey and having in your mind where you want it to go, and then letting the process kind of happen naturally has proven to be a much better way to go about it. And so, after I started thinking about it, and I was like, I think like if it's El Dorado County, I feel like Vermentino like might be, I think, the starting point to me, because there's elevation, the soil type, like it all kind of seems to fit. And I've had several examples, and I really liked some of them and not liked some others. And so, the timing was there. And, Chuck Mansfield's an amazing guy, and they had a couple rows that they hadn't really sold to anyone really before that were recently grafted. And I said, let's try it. And thus far, I am completely impressed and stoked, and the wine tastes delicious. So, I think it's just sort of those, trying to think about those things and then let let life take me there,
Okay.
and then try to identify when it doesn't seem right. Sometimes you have to you gotta,
Cut
you
bait
gotta
on
do
it.
it and then learn the hard way. But I think trying to let life take me to those places.
Okay.
And then once we get there and boots are on the ground, I always try to take my wife with me there because she's much more connected in that regard, and she has a much greater barometer for this feels good and this doesn't feel good.
Okay.
And so if it feels good, then we'll probably continue. We'll at least try it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
If you want to jump into 22 Valdegate, we can.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing like Beaujolais. Tastes more like our own wine to me.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think since you just poured some, I'd like to ask you about working with Valdegate.
Yeah, Valdegate is such an interesting variety, and a little bit of it feels a little bit obligatory if we're trying to express Solano County, and Green Valley is a big part of that. It kind of feels like we need to explore that. And, it's got a special place because of its history there in Green Valley, and kind of, being around, my childhood stomping grounds and not knowing what that was, or even never having heard of it. But, the lineage and the history of the variety coming to California and being misidentified as Gamay Noir,
Right.
and how it was perceived for so many years. And, again, that's that link of history where we're always trying to respect history when we can. And old vines are always, I'm not like one of those like only old vines make a good wine. I don't think that at all. I think young vines make really delicious wine as well. But if there are old vines in the ground, like probably you should go there first.
Sure.
Especially in cases like this where there's not irrigation and like the vines are established. They just manage themselves more or less. So it's very little input on what's going on, and the farming is less impactful. Everything is a little bit easier. So if you can capitalize and express from old vines, I think that's always better. And so, this vineyard was planted in the early 1960s, actually co-planted in a really interesting block of Valdegate, Carignan, and Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oh,
so an interesting makeup that I've not ever seen those three co-planted
separate blocks
before.
or,
No,
or all interplanted?
They're all mixed. And so, that's a challenge of, trying to show the picking crew what the leaves look like so that they don't pick the Cabernet, which is how we did it. We did not put Cabernet in this wine, which to me was like, sounds really interesting. And I do want to know what that tastes like, but I don't think that is the expression that is suitable here. That's not that seems like a one-off that those three are together, and you would not really find that. That's not a common combination. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Was that do you know if it was for a specific producer or?
I have no idea. It's a random block in a residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's like less than 2 acres. It just was like I'd never seen it before. And I didn't even know that vineyard was there until I, had driven by on a happenstance. So it just, it didn't make that much sense, at least like to gamble on it first try. I was not comfortable with doing that,
Yeah, understandable.
And Green Valley is a pretty cold place. So like, I didn't want to risk like some super pyrazinic green Cabernet coming in and, really modifying the way that the wine was going to present itself. And then you kind of get into a little bit of a perception issue where I really my dream is to not list varieties on any of the wines.
Okay.
Because I want to express place. That probably will prove to be impossible from a sales standpoint. People really like to know what it is that they're drinking.
Yeah.
So that would kind of make that further complicated by including some Cabernet in the mix. So we decided to opt out of the Cabernet. There is a little bit of Carignan in there, though. Undisclosed amount. We don't know because we just took it all and fermented it together. So, but it's a really interesting variety. You know, I think that it's often understood or branded as, you know, fresh and lively and quaffable, and I think it's much more serious at its core. You know, it's much more tannic than Gamay Noir generally is, and it has a more kind of like really like rustic feel to it, and I like that. It makes me feel like old California. You know, it makes me feel like,
Yeah.
you know, those random old bottles of Hardy Burgundy or, you know, whatever. Like, it makes me feel like that rustic, like genuinely pure California feeling.
Yeah.
That I don't find in other varieties, you know, because they all kind of all like take you to another place a little bit, you know, like
Yeah.
the best Chardonnay and Pinot Noir or Syrah or whatever. Like they're all kind of like, you know, they're reminding me of what the benchmarks of France taste like, and Valdegui is kind of uniquely Californian in a way. You know, it's kind of, I think, deserves a similar lens as Zinfandel. It's kind of uniquely ours,
Right.
And there's something really fun and special about the grape, and you know, it was one of Emily and I's earliest long nights of conversation was a bottle of Brock Balbegui from Solano County. And so it was always like, we should probably make, you know, in honor of us, we should probably make some someday. And so, yeah, we got the chance to do it, and we're pretty happy about it, and we'll definitely continue. I think it's a really fun variety, and it definitely is, in my opinion, the perfect expression of Solano County.
Yeah, I love when it's not covered up with any oak, really. Sometimes I feel like it's a grape that any new oak could really kind of overpower. You lose the.
I would agree.
You lose a lot of the identity.
Yeah, the oak is not something. Is not a flavor that I particularly enjoy. In most cases, I've been proven wrong for sure. Craig's first vintage with his big Rousseau foeder in there, he put Chenin Blanc in, and I remember tasting that, you know, after the wine had finished, and just, you know, you feel sometimes like after so many years you kind of have like your opinion, and you're like, well, I know that I definitely don't like new oak, and like new oak on like white wine especially is like doesn't taste great. And then you taste something like that and you're like, yeah, but like Chenin Blanc with like some reduction and a little bit of new oak is unbelievably delicious. And so, you know, that's another one of those eye-opening, you're like, God damn it, like, don't make any claims, you know? But generally speaking, I don't really, I want to taste the fruit and I want to taste the place. And oftentimes throwing in new oak flavors kind of muddies those waters a bit. And it's also pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So we definitely don't buy any new barrels. And that's a pretty, I feel like a pretty good, I feel confident we probably will not do that. Include any new barrels as long as we can help it. I probably will not do that. I think it's just a better way to be able to perceive place without the inclusion of new barrels.
Is the Carignan you're making, is that from the same vineyard in Solano, or is that?
No, so this particular one, we've kind of been a little bit bopping around a little bit in the Carignan world. So in 2020, we produced some old vine from Parenti. We did get that fruit back this year.
Okay.
So we do have that in barrel now, which theoretically will probably get blended with the Valdegui is kind of the idea. And then we started last year in Amador County with some very, very old vines from 1916, which is a very, very special expression, which we should probably taste the 22 here since it's open. So yeah, Carignan is a really interesting variety, especially in terms of old vine expressions. It's, I think, one of those varieties that gets more special the older that the vines get. And, again, another similar situation of the vines are old, they're in the ground, they don't put water on them. Maintenance is very low. And so if you can start there, I think that's always the best place to start. And having the chance to produce from vines that are older than my grandfather is, it's just, again, the history of being able to do something today that was the product of, I just think all every time I drink this wine, I'm like, what was happening in 1916 on Ridge Road, in Amador County? Like, who planted these grapes? Like, that's crazy to me. And they're still there, and they've been in the hands of the Merle family since 1985. I think they bought the property, and it's just, it's such a special thing. And Carignan is, a bit of a chameleon in a lot of different ways, where it's naturally a pretty acidic variety. And so for me, I don't want to correct chemistry. If we're working in warmer climates, let's lean into varieties that are going to, naturally present themselves without the need for correction. So Carignan is one of those grapes, and I love it because it can take on so many different styles as an end product, depending on what you do with it. And, in 21, we destemmed everything and added in a very small portion of the stems back in. And the wine is delicious. It's so lifted and red fruited, and, it has this like almost dusty kind of rose laden earthy quality that sometimes almost reminds me of like roasted beets, which to me, in my logic, feels like, oh, well, maybe that's like kind of that iron rich, dense, like Aiken clay loam soil. Maybe that's what that is. And that makes me feel really happy that, the wine kind of feels like it's from Amador County. It's not Zinfandel, but to me, like, these vines have been there a very long time, and Zinfandel and Carignan very often are planted around each other. There's Zinfandel directly next to this block. And so, I think Carignan is very close to my heart, and I hope to make Carignan forever because I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, this wine drinks almost like Grenache, or like, like maybe in some worlds Pinot Noir. It's, really, really interesting.
Yeah, that roasted beet, that's kind of a flavor I kind of associate with Pinot.
Yeah. And it's kind of has a little bit of that quality. Yeah.
Made some Syrah this year also, right?
This year, we did not.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
In 22, we did. And this year we did not make any Syrah. I made Syrah in 2021 from a small vineyard in Green Valley. And really, Syrah is the one that's like so important to me that I feel like I have to stop making it because I have not cracked the code on it yet. And so I've tried 3 different times after that, and none of them are what I want to feel out of Syrah.
Okay.
And so I decided, like, I'm going to just
give it a rest for a minute.
Give it a rest, and I'm going to stop trying. I'm going to let the universe take me there when I'm ready to go there.
Okay.
And so I think, over eagerness often sets you into a place where you're trying to accomplish something, and you will you're maybe more inclined to compromise because your priority is to accomplish the thing. So if you can't find the perfect set of requirements, you might give a little on one or two things just so you can accomplish it. And I don't want to do that anymore. So
Yeah.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the right place to show up.
Good.
And we may have found it.
Oh,
but
even better.
we did not have we hit our capacity this year for sure. So maybe next year. Maybe next year we might explore that again. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talked about the Valier, but you do have some actual Gamay.
There's also some Gamay in the cellar. Yes, there is some true Gamay Noir in the cellar at the moment. And again, another, life brought us to that. And so Gamay and Syrah are kind of the two red varieties that more or less make my world go around. That's what I like to buy those wines, and I put those wines in my cellar, and I love them. Those, Beaujolais and Syrah from the Northern Rhone are two things I love more than pretty much any other wine. And Gamay is pretty tricky in California.
Yeah.
There's not really much of it, and it's difficult to get. And it's never made me feel that way that Beaujolais does. And, that's not just a factor of, carbonic maceration. And, that to me is not the conversation. It's much more about place. And I felt for a long time that like Gamay just hasn't found its area. It's like wherever it's been put, that's not the place for it. And maybe two years ago or so, I was at a friend's house, Eben Drucker, who's really close with Ian Brand, and he had pulled a bottle of Gamay Noir out that had just been released and was like, Ian's making Gamay. And I was like, I love Ian's wines. They're some of my favorite in California. And I was like, this is going to be delicious for sure. Let's try the wine. And he opened it and we drank it. And I was like, this is the only Gamay I've ever had from California that makes me feel like Beaujolais makes me feel. And of course I asked, where is he getting that fruit? And of course he told me Scott Caraccioli. And I immediately texted Scott and was like, what's up with the Gamay, dude? And so, yeah, he was like, we grafted a couple acres, where it's kind of an experiment, but thus far we like it. So I'll put you on the waiting list because a lot of other people like it too. And so I said, put me on the waiting list whenever it's available. We will take it. And so this year, 11th hour, he was like, I'm going to have some extra. And I said, you tell me when, and I will be there. So I got in an old Verna, she's our 71 C20, and I drove my ass 4 hours to Gonzales and stayed in a Motel 6 and picked up a couple boxes of Gamay Noir. And, the fruit's perfect. The vineyard's incredible. It's, he's got 2 clones at the moment, and they're, at the highest elevation on his vineyard, and it's all granite soils, rocky, super granite. And, I've had one other example off that site from Samuel Lewis Smith that completely floored me. And I think that hopefully if we as producers can develop enough economic stability, I think that we'll see a lot more Gamay Noir planted in Santa Lucia Highlands. I think that there's something really, really there. So I'm very excited about what we have in barrel right now. And, Megan Zobeck got some this year as well. And she's obviously doing amazing things with Gamay as well. So I think, maybe there's a Gamay revolution going on at the moment. So very, very exciting for sure.
Yeah, I think it's great to have find some new locations where it can be, because there really just isn't much of it in California.
There's not much. Yeah. And, a Gamay, I think, is a variety that needs a particular set of circumstances, like really any variety. There are some that are a little bit more pliable. Carignan, you can kind of throw in a lot of different places and get a result. But, like Pinot Noir, Gamay Noir is in that similar realm where like the right set of circumstances, I think is the best case scenario. And in California, we don't have a similar set of microclimate and soil type like you'd find in Beaujolais. So Santa Lucia perhaps is one of the closer places. And so time will tell, but it's pretty exciting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that is like, it feels like that's very ground floor, like something's kind of being discovered at the moment. And, that's incredibly exciting to get to participate in, and, to see the very short list of people that are producing that fruit and be on that list is pretty neat. So
yeah, and it sounded like you kind of ended up getting the fruit a couple years before you originally thought, even, right?
Life took us there. I was saving up. I was saving up money for 2025, and that was on a whim, which again is just sometimes is how it goes. Is sometimes there's fruit and sometimes there's not fruit, depending on the vintage. So there was extra fruit, and I'm pretty sure Scott asked Eben who he should give fruit to, and Eben told him that he should give it to me. So thanks, Eben.
It's good to have friends.
Scott, both. Yeah. But again, that's oftentimes is how these things happen. And so having, first, who is it that you're working with is really important.
Yeah.
So, and that one proved to work in our favor. So,
are there any grapes or areas that you haven't been able to explore that you are kind of like itching for?
Lots.
And you don't have to say either if you want to keep them
there's loads. I mean, to me, like, it's a playground. There's so much to explore, and that's a part of what I love, is that it kind of never ends, and my family is from Oregon, and I really would love to find a way to explore Oregon terroir at some point. There's a lot of places, and one of the other nuts I've been trying to crack is Cabernet Franc, and I might have to go to Oregon for that one.
Mm.
And I'm not sure yet. I'm still exploring and tasting and trying to evaluate where that might make sense. And at the moment, San Benito is kind of my target. I think that makes good sense, but there's some pretty damn delicious Cabernet Franc coming out of Oregon at the moment. But in that same track, I've been driving between Northern California and Oregon my entire life. And every time I get to Shasta, I'm like, I think you could grow some really delicious grapes here.
Yeah.
And that is a very undiscovered region. So I think that could be really fun. I'd really like to be able to produce some Chardonnay at some point, but that's going to be a while, I think, on that one. Because that I know very precisely what that I want out of that, and where I want that to come from that makes sense to me, and how to do it, and we're not there yet. So in time, but that's a big one for sure. And then cracking Syrah is going to be, that's close, I think. But I think this year we were able to kind of explore some new things that were on my list for a while. And, Vermentino being one of those in El Dorado County, and Gamay in Monterey County. Those were two targets that I think came around that I think will stick. I think those have really good legs to make a lot of sense. So yeah, I mean, beyond that, I really love Santa Barbara County.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot of people making really good wines out of Santa Barbara County. So I'm not sure we need to add to that.
Okay.
At the moment, I'm happy enough to just drink those bottles and not have to drive that far. So at the moment, I think Sonoma County is probably the top target.
Okay.
Which probably will be Chardonnay.
Yeah. Okay.
So that might be a ways out. I've always kind of considered Mendocino as well, but I'm uncertain on where to start with that. There's so much history, but also so much, modernity and so many different expressions, so many great ones. Like I'm not sure what makes sense for Mendocino County and from my perspective, I don't know yet. There's great old vine Carignan and Valdegui and also great Chardonnay and great Syrah. And, there's just so many, there's a lot of great wines. And so I'm not sure how to express that place yet. But yeah, I think Sonoma County is the closest to our heart from a place of wanting to express. But most of the fruit in Sonoma is pretty expensive, so
yeah,
we'll probably be a ways out on that one.
How did you find yourself working here with Craig and at kind of Harmeyer, but historically the Harbor Winery?
Yeah, it was 2020, and we decided to start making wine. And again, doing first and sorting out later is the general trend. So, I decided to make some wine and, secured some sources and kind of got the plan together and had not any place to make the wines. So we were creeping up on harvest pretty quickly, and Adam Sake was scheduled here in 2020. He had produced a single barrel the year prior, which was kind of his precursor, and that was done at Turley. And then he had left Turley and was just kind of focused on launching Perch. And so I knew he was going to be here, and then I was like, well, that's probably way too many cooks in this tiny kitchen. But I just, it kind of came down to lamenting to Craig, and he's like, I think I probably mentioned it a few too many times. And he's like, you can do it here if you want. I was like, okay, that sounds good. And so, 2020 was, that was a fun harvest. It was obviously ripe with COVID situation, and it was hot as all hell, and the doors were open, and then we do we wear masks? We what it was like a really uncomfortable in a lot of ways, but also was like such a blast at the same time, because it was all three of us were all in here producing, and it was just a fun collective kind of environment of Adam and I trying to figure shit out, and it was a good time for sure. And so it's less than 10 minutes from my house, and kind of one of the only wineries in Sacramento, but also such an amazing historical place to be able to produce. And there's so much history here, and it has its own signature for sure.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to be able to start producing wine and have your wines kind of taste like they've been around a while, which is kind of cool. So
yeah, I think I remember Craig saying, like, fermentations take off Mallow takes
Mallow's
off.
finishing very quickly.
It all moves quick here.
Yes, a little bit slower this year. Thankfully, much colder. But yeah, oftentimes that was certainly a lesson to be learned in the first few years, that mallow's probably happening in conjunction with alcoholic, if not before.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a great situation to get, mouse taint and all sorts of things. And so it's always, you got to be pretty alert in the cellar. And, it makes work relatively straightforward, because it's more about things that you can't do. You kind of just have to, there's not a bunch of big tanks. It's like red ferments are all in T-bins, because that's what we have available. And so, it kind of helps focus your protocol decisions. And, it's a very, Alex and Craig have a very relaxed attitude about things, which is, for someone new, I think is a really great perspective to not feel so rigid about things, and generally Craig's response is, it'll be fine. And that's proven to be pretty true. So, someone super concerned about what, but wait, and then is this going to happen? And how do I, it's kind of nice to have someone who's like, just relax.
Yeah.
It'll be okay. It's simple. Just let it be simple, And so, yeah, it's been, now our fourth harvest this year.
Yeah.
In the building. So I think we're starting to figure it out.
Nice. I know you had a new release recently.
But yeah, we just released all the 22s. What is it now? January? Yeah, in November, I think we did. So just before the end of fall. So technically it was still a fall release. But so go the rigors of, a family and a full-time job and trying to not kill yourself on weekends and at night.
Yeah.
After the kids go to sleep. So yeah, we just released the wines, and obviously the greatest way is just on the website directly, communeregionalwines.com. That's certainly the most advantageous for a small producer. But yeah, you can also find the wines in some select retail restaurants throughout Northern California. I wouldn't have a precise list off the top of my head. But yeah, there's, Paul Marcus in the East Bay has some of the wines. Here in Sacramento, Taylor's Market stocks them. And then, Rochambeau is a great supporter as well, from like a more wine bar situation. So they're kind of, in and around, and we don't make a lot of wine. Most things are 1 barrel cuvées. So they're certainly not to be spread around all over the place, but yeah, just directly on the website is definitely the best way to do it. And we can, we're able to ship through third party to, pretty much anywhere in the country. So yeah, they're available there, not for long. Carignan's pretty much sold out already, so get them while you can.
Thanks for listening to our episode today with Tyler and Commune Regional Wines. These are amazingly food-friendly wines made from unique sources and small quantities, and you should really try them. You can find the wines at communeregionalwines.com and follow what they're up to at Commune Regional Wines on Instagram. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening, and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. Feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you can tell your wine friends about the podcast too and help spread the word, I'd really appreciate it. Rating or subscribing helps too. There's also a Patreon if you would like to support the podcast monetarily to hopefully allow for more episodes, more travel, and to help defray other costs. Link is in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.